I wanna know
when we gonna make a change.
Gotta be strong. Some things we can't change. Tell me
when we gonna wake up.
I wanna know
when we gonna make a change.
You gotta be strong. Some things we can't change.
Welcome to the Man in the House radio show here at HamiltonRadio.net. I'm your host, Clarence Haynes. Also hosting with me is Pastor Ronald Godbout. And we have a very special guest for here today. And I'm going to let Pastor Godbout introduce our guest.
Amen. Praise the Lord. Today I want to introduce my friend, my mentor, no other than Elder Josh Shellman. Historical man, a man of God, a man with a lot of integrity, a man with a lot of knowledge of the Word of God, but also is very knowledgeable of a lot of history, black history or biblical history or any type of history that you want to know. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and my buddy and my mentor, no other than Elder Joshua Shellman. Amen?
Amen. Good morning. Good evening, brother.
Good evening. I appreciate the introduction. The introduction was timely, and I'm humbled by it. My name is Joshua Shellman, Jr., as it was mentioned, and I am the product of two worlds here in America. I'm the product of the South, which I was born there, and, of course, naturally, the prejudice and the bigotry and the segregation that the South had during the time of my birth. I'm also a product of the North, where I experienced a sense of integration, but I also experienced segregation. And with that being said, what we would like to do today is talk about how did all this prejudice and bigotry and hate and segregation begin? There's always a beginning. And what we would like to talk about in brief is Taken, the beginning. Taken is an attempt to rechart the destiny and history of the so-called Negro, the black man, and the black woman and their families. The journey takes us into Africa, Europe, the Middle East, the Far East, America, and South America. We will discover an iron-willed people, yet a great people of love and compassion. Contributions made in the areas of history, science, language, religion, culinary arts, sports, sociology, philosophy, agriculture, theater and dance, and finally, civil rights. The revelation of economic deprivation and white supremacy, a combination that tried to destroy the core, the identity of the black man and the black woman. The findings of bigotry, hate, prejudice in every aspect of the black man and black woman's life. The core which permeates internal and external rebellion. There's a general acceptance of oppression, suppression, oppression, and depression, which culminates in total possession. The above evils create domination, which is unacceptable to the human spirit. We find the hypocrisy of our own people in our native land, who enslaved each other and compromised our freedom to the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, the Spanish, and finally, the Americans. With this in mind, we tend to explore why, as a black people, that we are what we are today. We must keep in mind that during these many times of oppression, depression, and suppression, there was nothing more than what we call the rule of law. When did it begin? In 1588, there was a man by the name of Captain William Tucker. Of course, Captain Tucker was white. By 1607, Captain Tucker was one of the founders of Jamestown, Virginia, which was a colony. By 1619, there were 3 ships that appeared on the Atlantic Ocean that rode down through the Jamestown River: the Batista, the Treasurer, and of course, the White Lion. August the 28th of 1619, 20 slaves came off of the White Lion. And the reason that they did was that there was a firefight on the Atlantic Ocean, and the White Lion was damaged. The white captain needed repairs on the ship. As an end result of this, he had no money. He had nothing more than 20 slaves that were taken from Angola. As these slaves offered an opportunity for them, they were taken off the ship and traded. And who was the man that bought them? None other than Captain William Tucker. The year at this point, 1623, the 2 people that were primarily taken, Antonio and Isabel, 2 black slaves from Angola. They had a son, and because he was where he was, Fort Comfort, which was right around from Jamestown, he therefore said, "Come on in. You're having this baby. We're going to keep him. We're going to raise him." And they named him after their master, William Tucker, the first black that was ever born in America. In approximately 1634, Antonio and Isabel were set free from Jamestown. They moved a little farther on. And of course, as history has it, they had a family. Now, currently there is a discussion about who the Tuckers really are. That has taken place in Jamestown. There's about 175 years of history that's missing. So they're saying that they're related to William Tucker, the son. That remains to be seen. The 1712, Willie Lynch and the Lynch Papers and how to make a slave. We're going to go into a little bit about Mr. Lynch, and if what was recorded of him is true, I will portray the part of Mr. Lynch. Well, I see that you Jamestown folks here are really concerned about your niggers. And as I was riding around here on my horse, I saw one of them lynched. Well, let me tell you now, you need to understand that the nigger is of economic importance. You are killing off your workforce. You're killing off the people that's going to make you money. Well, let me tell you now, I'm out of the West Indies, and I have about 2,000 or more niggers. And I don't have any uprising, and I don't have no trouble out of them, because I have some rules that I use. And you people of Jamestown have called me here because you're having revolution with your nigger folks, and I'm here to tell you how to stop it. The first thing you do, you take that bad nigger and you tie him up between two horses. And then you take his wife, you put her on one side along with them children. And then you take them other slaves that been listening to that nigger, and you whoop them, and you beat them. Now, mind you now, don't beat them to where they're dying. Because keep in mind, rule 1, they're of economic importance. But now you take that bad nigger, and you whoop him, and you douse him with flame, and you hit them horses, and when you hit them horses, they gonna rip him apart. That's showing them all right. Now, them niggas there on the side there that been listening to him, they gonna be very careful. They ain't gonna listen to no more uprising no more. Now, now here's the fun part. You do your business with that black woman, that man's wife. Some of the children gonna come out looking like me. Blonde hair and blue-eyed. Now, when that happens, you take that nigga and you put him in the house. But them dark-skinned ones, you put them out there in that field and let them work. Now you're teaching them a lesson, and the lesson is quite simple. You take the light-skinned nigga and you show him promise. You take them black-looking niggas, you put them out in the field, and then they're going to be war against each other. They're going to mistrust each other. You tell a black nigga not to trust a white nigga. You tell a white nigga not to trust a black nigga. And that way they're going to be responsible to you, the white man. Now, what happens is that you got all this confusion going on. You got these old niggas and you got these young niggas. You tell an old nigga not to trust a young nigga. You tell a young nigga not to trust the old nigga. And my God, I think that at that point you will have control. Now, history may record that morality, I may be a little off. But you didn't call me here for reality. You called me here so that you could save and make money. Now, this situation may go on for 1,000 of years forever. But nevertheless, I'm here, and this is what you have to do. History records that the Willie Lynch letter that came out in 1712 didn't reach the American public ears until approximately the 90s, 1990. Now, historians say that the letter is a forgery. And because they say it's a forgery, they've looked at the English language during that time. Some of the words in the letter itself did not compare to the 17th century. And so therefore they're saying that, hey, how come it took all these years to find this out? Well, even if the letter is a forgery, the methodology of what the whites did to subdue the black man's mind, to subdue his children, to subdue all that he did was put in place. There's an old saying, in order to make a slave, you must destroy the black man's history. In order to make a slave, you must destroy the black man's history and his religion. In order to make a slave, you now must destroy the black man's social life. And when you do that, you replace it with your own. A blonde hair, a blue-eyed Jesus, for example. Now, don't get me wrong. I am a Christian, and I believe in the Word of God. However, when you find in the Bible things such as slaves, be obedient to your masters. This was a means for the white man to control. He talked about the pie in the sky by and by. which meant that if I promise you all the good things, if you listen to me, you're going to make it into heaven. So therefore, it was a form of brainwashing and control. And he used it effectively as far as the black man is concerned. Let's move on. 1723, Christmas addicts. And I'm going to go ahead and go a little bit ahead of the game. In 1770, there was what was called the Boston Massacre. We would think that thousands and maybe hundreds of people was killed, but only five. Only five. 4 whites, 1 black. And the black man was none other than Christmas addicts, who was shot 2 times in the chest. But he was a big man, approximately 6 foot 2 inches tall, broad shoulders, weighed over 250 pounds, and he took those 2 shots in the chest and subdued his attacker, but succumbed to his wounds. This was the first time that a black man for a cause in the revolution had died. Remember that name, Christmas Addicts, 1770. We go to 1776, the Declaration of Independence for the whites. Let me repeat that. The Declaration of Independence from Great Britain for the 13 colonies was not for you or me, the black man. It was not fought for the black man, nor for his freedoms, but for the freedoms of the whites. 1812, the Spanish and American Revolution. Now, why do I mention that? Why does it play an important part in history? The Spanish owned Florida. And of course, during that period of time, Georgia had recently become a state around 1788. As an end result of this, 1750s, Georgia, didn't have slaves. Ogletree, who was one of the founding fathers here, believed that if we have slaves, they're going to go over to Florida. And they would join the army. And then they would attack us here. And therefore, we can't have that. So Andrew Jackson, who at that time was Colonel Jackson, would later become our president, led the attack on the Spanish in Florida and eventually defeated the Spanish, and the United States became a state of Florida. We move on from there to 1818. Frederick Douglass. Great old Fred was born in 1818, and we'll speak about Fred a little later. By 1820, there was the Missouri Compromise. Well, what is that? The Missouri Compromise said that Missouri could remain free or it could become a slave state. And the compromise was then that the government had said if there was a slave state, there was a free state. If there was a free state, there would be a slave state. So Maine had entered into the Union as a free state. 1854, the Dred Scott case, very important. Dred Scott, who was he? He was a slave. And as being a slave, he had gone to, with one of his mentors and his owner, he'd gone to Illinois. For 2 years he was in Illinois, and he remained there with his master. And after 2 years, he went back to Missouri. And he wanted to be free because in Illinois, a northern state, the folks there was free. But he took his case to the lower courts. The lower courts says, no, nigger, you's a slave. and you're going to be a slave for life. He then took his case to the Supreme Court. And in 1854, the Supreme Court took 3 years before they made a decision. So by 1857, the Supreme Court says, you cannot be free. The Constitution of the United States says that you can't be free. Supreme Court Judge Taney says, you cannot be free because we have it in the Constitution that you're only 3/5 of a man. Supreme Court, rule of law. By 1858, 1859, Mr. Dred Scott died. He was freed, by the way, in 1858. 1 year of freedom. Died of a massive heart attack because he couldn't take the pressure that had been applied to him all those years. 1860, by 1860, there are over 4 million slaves in the United States. There's between 10 to 15 million in South America. The slave trade was prosperous. And of course, with that 4 million slaves and 10 million to 15 million in South America, there were about 250,000 slaves that were free. And guess where they were free? Tennessee, Mississippi. Wow, the deep South.
Yes, sir.
Slave masters, black slave masters. Well, how is that? It was that way simply because that white man did his business with our black women, and those kids came out looking white. So when the old man died, those Negro men that look white took over the farms and took over the slaves. Now, there are two things involved here. Number one, if you were a slave master, a black slave master, some of them had morality and a conscience. They said, we will keep the slaves, we will pay them X amount of dollars, and if they choose to go back to Africa, we will let them go. The other slave masters was of economics, and they decided that you're going to follow the path that the South has always followed. You are black, you're a nigger, and you will work in those fields, or you'll be a part of my concubine. So the two schools of thoughts came at a situation where there would be nothing more than adversity. The year's 1860, toward the end of 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union. There were 11 states that seceded from the Union, all southern states. There were 4 states that were called byproduct, or states who didn't secede from the Union, but what they wanted to do ultimately was to support the Confederacy. They wanted to support, but they wouldn't secede from the Union. Virginia seceded from the Union, but West Virginia decided to break away from the Union because they didn't want to succeed. So now that's why you have West Virginia and you have Virginia, because of that reason. The Confederacy, 1861, fired upon Fort Sumter, which was the beginning of the Civil War. Now, when they did, They busted those other 10 states. Oh, they're winning, they're winning. So the other states succeeded respectfully so. By August of 1861, 11 states had seceded from the Union. And as I said, thus began the Civil War. Now, a famous woman was born during the Civil War period. Her name was Ida B. Wells. Ida was born in 1862, and unfortunately, she died in 1931. Well, who was Ida B. Wells? She was a stateswoman. She had been a slave but was freed. She was an educated woman. She taught school, got her bachelor's and master's degree, and she was a civil rightist, a person who looked for blacks to ascertain and to gain in a divided United States. She also, being a civil rightist, was also one of the people who detest lynchings. Now, by 1865 through 1968, it is documented that there has been over 4,400 lynchings in the United States. That's documented. There's been much more. But as an end result of this lynching here, in Montgomery, Alabama, and Mobile, there's a museum. And that museum has what is called 800 columns with the list of all the names of those 400 lynchings that's taken place. And the museum has offered every state that these lynchings have come into and county a column. How many states did you think have taken up that offer? None. It's not politically expedient to say that we killed people and we lynched them. Oh, by the way, New Jersey has its history too. New Jersey has about 9 million people. And of course, New Jersey being what it is, has a lot of bigotry, prejudice, a lot of hate. Right there in Burlington County, there was a slave revolt. And there were 26 slaves. And during the time of the Revolution, or a little bit before, the British had offered those slaves in the United States here, or the colonies, an opportunity to gain their freedoms. And what they said was simply this: you break away from the colonists, we will escort you to Canada, then to Nova Scotia, and then to Great Britain, and you will be free. So at one point, the leader in Burlington County got together with some of the others and said, hey, we got to get out of here. We're going to knock off old master, and what we're going to do is we're going to head to Niagara, and then, of course, we're going to be free. Well, like niggers do, there's always one that tells the story of what's going on. And there was one who went to old master's supper table and told master, they gonna get y'all. And old master at that point decided that he was going to warn the other white farmers, and he did. And so they captured that black man. that old nigger, as they called him. And the others who listened to him in this revolution, they cut their ears off. And they lynched and shot the leader. New Jersey was the last state to ratify the Constitution as regarding to the 13th Amendment. Let me repeat that. New Jersey was the last state to ratify the 13th Amendment. Well, what was the 13th Amendment? The abolition and freedom for the slaves, of making them free. There's more about New Jersey, but we won't talk about it now. By 1865, Emancipation Proclamation took place, and at that time, December the 6th, the 13th Amendment was ratified. By 1865 also, before Mr. Lincoln was assassinated, that were called byproduct or state confederacy. By 1865, after the Civil War, Lincoln was alive at that time. So he ordered one of his generals, and the general that he ordered was General T. Sherman. He said, I want you to go to Savannah, and when you go to Savannah, I need you to talk to these ministers there. There was 100 ministers. January the 12th of 1865 through the 16th of 1865. So General Sherman, along with Secretary of War Stanton, began to talk to those 100 ministers. And then on the 16th of January, he went back after going to Washington. And this is what he said. He says, I perceive that you Negro ministers want something from the United States government. And what is it that you want? So the ministers outlined 12 different things that they wanted. The most out of them all, one of the leading ministers, Allen, says, well, you know, I perceive that we will never get along with the white folk. There will never be any unity. So what we need is land and an opportunity to work that land and do for ourselves. And of course, the other 11 things that Stanton, Secretary of War, and General Sherman agreed to, they went back and they told President Lincoln. As the end result, Lincoln said, do it. So General Sherman issued out order, and don't forget this, order number 15. Well, what was order number 15? It said this: we will give you blacks 400,000 acres of land, 40 mules, and 40 acres. Now, let's change that. 40 acres and mules. And they did. Your reparations were given you, us, way back in 1865 under order number 15. So everybody was happy. We got the land, we got the mules, and it lasted for 1 year. Lincoln was assassinated by a man named John Wilkes Booth at the Ford Theater. Once Lincoln was killed, his second in command, Vice President Johnson, took over, and he rescinded order number 15, and all the land was taken back. At this time, the Ku Klux Klan raised their ugly heads. They were killing us like it was going out of style. And now we want to talk a little about lynchings and what happened. 1898, there was a man by the name of Fraser Baker. Fraser was under the Buchanan administration, and as an end result, Mr. Baker was given a position of postmaster in South Carolina. He was doing a very good job. I mean, he was working well. The mail delivery was 3 times a day. But the white folks, they didn't like that. That nigger up there, we don't want him delivering our mail. So they complained to the Postmaster General of the United States to take him out. So the Postmaster General suggested that instead of 3 times a day, just deliver the mail once a day. And he started that. So the white folks started complaining about that. One night in April, the wife smelled smoke in the home. She got out of the bedroom and she told her husband, "Fraser, I smell smoke. I smell smoke." They looked around and saw that the insides of the home was burning. So he said, "Let's get out of here." So the wife took their 2-year-old baby, had her in her arms, the other 4 children, and they opened the door and a shot rang out. Miss Baker was wounded in the arm, but the 2-year-old baby was shot through the head. The door was shut. They tried to stay in a little longer. So Mr. Baker says, "We got to get out of here. We can't make it." He opened the door and was gunned down. So now the 2-year-old's dead. Mr. Baker's dead. The wife with the other children runs out the door. 2 more of them were shot. They did make it to a neighbor's home. 15 men, white unmasked men, perpetrated the killing and the burning down of the home. Well, the federal government got involved because the state said, we're not going to do anything. They're innocent. The federal government got one of the men to give state evidence, and he turned against the other 14. He was let go. The 14 were charged, but they never did a day in jail. Typical of murders. We'll go to 1902. Hosey Williams, William Hosey, not Hosey Williams. William Hosey was a black man accused of stealing some horses, which he didn't do. 1,500 whites took him into some woods. "They're going to be a lynching, boys." Hundreds of people came from all over Georgia for this lynching. As an end result of it, Jose's on his knees pleading for, "I didn't do it, I didn't do it." They ran upon him with knives. They doused him with a flammable liquid. They set him afire. They then got glass jars and his remains, his testicles, his penis, his eyes, his ears, his nose, his teeth, his toes, and put it all in a glass jar. A couple weeks went by. There was a well-known man who went to a grocery store in Atlanta And when he opened the door and walked around the grocery store, he could see the jars of poor Mr. Williams there. And the whites, how much you want for them feet? How much you want for them ears? How much you want for them eyes? The man that witnessed this and in several of his books is none other than W.E. Du Bois, who witnessed this atrocity. Going from there, we're going to get a little personal. My family has been involved in the lynchings. 1946, July 25th, the Moores Ford lynching. In fact, Reverend Garbolt went with me to Georgia back this last July to witness the Moores Ford reenactment. Every year, July 25th, they do a reenactment of the killing. Roger Malcolm, who was a relative of mine. By the way, I'm a Shellman, but I'm also 33 other surnames, and one of them is Malcolm. I haven't proved it yet, but I have evidences that we were also related to Dr. King Williams, who both of our families were in a place called Stone Mountain in Atlanta, Georgia. My people are from there. In fact, my great-grandmother, whose name is Fanny Williams Shellman, but May Mary Dorsey, Charles Dorsey, or Charlie Boy they called him, World War II decorated veteran, and of course his common law wife, May Murray, was ambushed at the Moores Ford Bridge, July 25th, 1946. But going back, there was another relative that was 35 years prior that was also killed. July 28th, 1911, a man by the name of Joe Watts. Years ago, when I was a small kid, I used to go to my mother's house and went in her bedroom, and she had a picture. And there she had this man in this picture. He was all lynched up, tied to a tree and just laying there. So when I was, I guess, about 9 years old, I asked her, Mom, who is that? None of your business, boy. Mind your own business. Then she started shaking, nervous. At the age of 32, I went back to her home again, and I went in her bedroom. That picture was still there. And I said, Mom, when I was small, you wouldn't talk to me about that picture. I'm a grown man now. I need to know. That's your uncle, boy. My great uncle, her uncle, but my great uncle was her father's brother. Now, why would they lynch him? Well, he was working for a family by the name of Blassingame, a white family. He was out in the fields one day, which was a common thing. He decides that he's going to come home early. When he did, he saw this white man coming out of his back door. So now he's going to follow him. And he follows him to the Blassingame home. So he's looking through the windows. Mrs. Blassingame looks out and says, Joe's out there peeking in the windows. So they called the sheriff department. The sheriff department arrested him, and they charged him was acting suspicious. Well, on July the 11th, there was another relative of mine by the name of Timothy Allen who was accused of raping a white woman by the name of Leila Knight. Her maiden name was Leila Page, which he didn't do. The jail he was locked up in was the same one that my uncle was in, Joe Watts. As the end result of that, because they were afraid that they were going to lynch him, they took him to Atlanta, where they had the trial. And Judge Bland, Joe Bland, makes a provincial statement. Well, we're going to send this nigger back because I would not endanger the life of one white man in the case and cause for this nigger man 100 white men. So they sent him back on the train from Atlanta to Monroe. When it got to Monroe, over 500 white men stopped the train, 6 sheriff deputies on the train, and they took Timothy Allen and they lynched him to the highest pole they could find and shot him and then put notes on his body saying, "Don't take no souvenirs from this nigger. The rest of these niggers have to learn that we don't play." And typically, that's what went on with killings over and over and over again. Some of them were killed and lynched simply because they looked cross-eyed at a white girl, 6-year-old white girl. "Daddy, Daddy, that nigger man, he looking cross-eyed at me." They would lynch him. Some of them didn't tip their hats, and they lynched them. Some of them went into a bedroom that they were ordered into, and they said that he was trying to rape a white woman. The cause of lynchings, number one, if a black man were to assault a white man, you get lynched. That's number one. Number two, if a black man attempted to or accused of raping a white woman, you were lynched. Number three, if you violated the black codes or Jim Crow laws, you were lynched. We didn't have a possible chance. The lynching was atrocious. There's one more famous lynching I want to talk about. Happened in 1955. And in this specific lynching, a young man by the name of Emmett Till, only 14 years old, was in a place, he was out of Chicago, Illinois, but he went to visit his relatives, and when visiting them, they decided that they were going to go to the local store. Well, there was this white woman in that store, and her name was Carol Bryant. And he went to order something, and the white woman told her husband, whose name was Roy Bryant, that he whistled at her. Well, little does history point out that Emmett had a stuttering problem. He wasn't fluent. And his mother had taught him that if you need something, whistle. But the white woman said he whistled at her. Well, the brother-in-law and the husband went to Emmett's house that night. They found him. They took him out. They beat him, shot him, and then put a fan, which was a cotton gin fan, 75 pounds around his neck, and threw him in the river. 14 years old. In 2017, Carolyn Bryant says he didn't do it. He didn't do it. She said, I lied. What happened to her? Nothing. Will they do anything? Highly unlikely because of her age. Her husband died in 1990. Millen, the brother-in-law, died in 1980. And they were bragging about what they had done. So the list goes on and on and on and on with lynchings. Maceo Snipes, 1946, a World War decorated veteran, July 18th, killed in Georgia, Butler, Georgia, simply because of the fact that he registered to vote in the all-white primary. Voting rights. We're going to skip ahead to 1965, and then I guess we have a few more minutes after that. You let me know. In 1965, after Selma, which Dr. King had been involved in, marching from Selma to Montgomery, 54-mile journey. There were 2 marches to Selma, by the way, and Dr. King was not in the first. The first march to Selma to Montgomery ended up where the children were hosed, dogs were set upon them, they were incarcerated. So Dr. King decides, I got to get out in front. So Dr. King takes about 15,000 people with him, and they're marching to Montgomery. They get to the Paramus Bridge, and on the bridge were state troopers. And Dr. King decided, we won't go any farther. We'll kneel and pray. Now, that caused several problems. The younger people like Stokely Carmichael, Eldridge Cleaver, and all those guys says, he's soft. And there was always the two schools of thought. They believed that you should attack. He believed sit-ins. That's why in 1959 he went to India. Now, Gandhi, which he patterned his nonviolent techniques after, had died, was assassinated when Dr. King was only 19 years old. He never met Gandhi. But he did meet in 1959 the premier of India, which was Nehru. Now, amazingly enough, Dr. King, the sit-in, and I need to just mention a couple more things. I asked you a question, Reverend, about a man by the name of A.D. King. His name actually was A.D. Williams King. He was Dr. King's brother. And he was actually the organizer and coordinator of everything that Dr. King did. Born in July of 1930, died in July 21st, 1969. He was found dead in the swimming pool, an excellent swimmer. They drug his body out. He was found by his son Dexter. They drug his body out. And the ambulance technician says there's no water in his lungs. The wife was in Jamaica at the time. She flew back home once learning that her husband was dead, went to the funeral home where the body was, and she notes that there were ring black marks around his neck and his head, which indicates that he was possibly beaten. But history is history. An autopsy was done, and the SCL nor the King family never revealed what happened as far as the autopsy. Well, you wonder why. 3 of his children died of heart attacks. All his kids died. They died of heart attacks. And normally what happens, if a person have problems with heart conditions, as his family obviously did, it becomes under suspicion. See, history, there are several ways you can look at history. You look at history from the perspective of, I agree, I'm pro with what happened, or you look at history as being negativistic, I don't agree, or you look at history for being antagonistic, well, history's this, history's that, so you just report it, or you look for the truth. History has truth, and we must look at it as truth. And so we must report whatever history says. Now, what you see doesn't necessarily mean that's what it is, and I'll give an example of this in conclusion. About 25 years ago, I was here in Trenton, and I was on Pennington Avenue, and I saw this old man walking down the street. I'm in my car off of Fraser Street, and this old man, he's just stumbling around, and then he's got this brown paper bag, and he turns it up, and finally he falls. Me being self-righteous, I would suspect, says, look at that old drunk man. This time of day, 12 o'clock, he's staggering down the street with this bottle and this brown paper bag, and he's falling all over the place, and now he's fell down. So I went over to see how he was. I got the shock of my life. When I went to this old man, I looked at his chest, and he had a bracelet on indicating that he had seizures. The old brown paper bag that I assume was liquor was a soda. And he was trying to get the sugar to build it up. And he was staggering simply because of the fact that he was having a grand mal seizure. Ambulance come up, verified everything. And I says, oh my God. I says, I judged this man based on what I saw. But it wasn't the truth. So we have to be careful of what we hear, what we see, and what we say. Because what we hear and say and even think is not the real truth. That's why in the Bible it talks about the spirit that God gives of discernment. See, if God gives it to you, you can discern the truth. Otherwise, it's assumption based on what we hear, what we think, what we're told, and what we see. So, in the aspirations of this, we're learning different parts about history. And each of these dates tells us as black people about our history. For example, I didn't talk to you about inventions. About 80% of the things that you see in your home a black man invented. When you understand that the laws during the 1865 era up until that time says that anything that a black man invented belonged to his master. It's not just George Washington Carver, but there are many black men. I'm going to read a list of some of the things here of some of our black people that did a lot of inventions and science and history and the things that we mentioned through our introduction. We're going to talk about 20 black leaders in American U.S. history. There was Benjamin Banneker, who was born in 1731 and died in 1806. Now, most people don't know that Benjamin Banneker was an engineer. And it was he that orchestrated the finishing and building of those beautiful buildings that you see in Washington, D.C. You talk about people like Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist. Now, we didn't talk about the Freedmen's Bank, but I think we need to mention it. When I was a small lad, I saw my grandmother. I was living in Cranberry at the time, Cranberry, New Jersey, and I saw my grandmother taking some money out of her dress, and she was putting it in a glass jar. And she took that glass jar, and she buried some underneath the porch, and she buried some in what was called at that time an old outhouse. We didn't have modern bathroom. We had that old outhouse where we had to go do our business. And I said to her, Gramps, being modern and educated young man, you need to put your money in the bank. Why are you burying this money? My grandmother said to me, you can't trust them banks and them white folks. They're going to steal your money. I laughed. Little did I know as I began to do research and study many years later that now I know why she hid her money. In 1865, the black soldiers, there were a total of 179,000 blacks who was on the Union side. They got their rocking chair pay, which at one point was $10. The whites were getting $13. And then finally, the Lincoln says, well, let's give them $13. So the businessmen around the country and in Washington says, well, they're getting a lot of money. You know, we need to do something with that money. So they created what was called the Freedmen's Bank. Well, the Freedmen's Bank had 70,000 depositors. 70,000 depositors, and had placed in the bank $57 million. Can you imagine that? At that time and what it would be worth now? The bank was doing well. But all of a sudden, unscrupulous businessmen decided that they wanted to embezzle, mismanagement, invest, and the bank was nearly bankrupt. So what did they do? They called in that gentleman that was born in 1818. His name was Frederick Douglass. And they say, Fred, we got great confidence in you. Now, we want to make you president of the Freedmen's Bank. Fred says, oh, boy, yeah. You are outstanding. The blacks respect you. So Fred says yes. In fact, to ensure the blacks that everything was okay, Fred put in $10,000 of his own money just to show the blacks that the bank was solvent. But by 1874, poor old Fred didn't know that those white folks had been stealing that money. And the bank went kaput. Now, some of my relatives were in that bank. Well, how do I know? Well, the Mormon Church purchased the records of the Freedmen's Bank. And I do genealogical research. In fact, I have 33 surnames, and I do research on genealogy. And so, therefore, I went to the Mormon Church, got a disc of all the bank depositors. Now, what that meant was it would give the old slave owner's name, it would give the former slave name, the plantations, when they made the deposit, relatives, etc. It's a wealth of information if you're doing genealogical research. So this was done. But old Fred, it broke his heart because he didn't know. He didn't know. And this is a thing that we today need to look at when we make investments with certain groups of people. We need to identify and get as much information as we possibly can. But you see, those that are white have white supremacy as a means of saying that you and I are nobody. In order to do that, you have to, as I mentioned before, take away a man's education. But think of this. Back during that time, if you took a white person and you put him in Africa, he would have to learn the language. He would have to have the education. He would now have to understand their religion. He would have to understand the fact of who they were, the laws of the land. But he wouldn't. So the African people, on the other hand, would call him ignorant. And that's what they did to us. They snatched us away. And so during the journeys across the Atlantic to the Americas, the African people were brainwashed. They were told how they had to act. They were told certain things they had to learn. Now, many of them couldn't speak the language. You take, for example, the ships that ended up in Jamestown, the Batista, the Treasure, and the White Lion. There were actually 300 people that were aboard those ships, but only about 120 made it. Well, what happened to the 180? Many of them jumped overboard, committed suicide, eaten by sharks. Others had to go through the fact that malaria and other diseases that were happening on the ship because the African people weren't used to being around those white folk. Then we get into the point of what part did our African people play? Back in 1990, the NAACP and the Southern Christian Conference leadership received from Africa an apology stating that the African leaders were sorry that they were complicit in sending our people on the ships over here. Chase Manhattan Bank in the 1990s had, it's crazy, they had owned some of the plantations during the 1800s. When the slave masters couldn't afford to pay, they bought them out and was involved in the slave trade. Aetna Insurance Company, its subsidiaries, was insuring the slaves for the slave masters. So it was nothing for them to kill them. They were getting paid. New Jersey here, back during the 17 and 1800s. You think about welfare, you do the numbers on the welfare here in New Jersey. You will find that there are more whites and other groups on welfare than there are black folks. But you and I get the blame. See, that's the media. And because of the fact that our leaders are not aware of the economic and political information regarding what's going on. New Jersey has 9 million people, as I mentioned before. But out of that, did you not know that we as blacks are third-place citizens? There's about 1.2 million blacks in New Jersey, but there are nearly 3 million Hispanics in New Jersey. So there's about 5.3 million whites. So now who are the laws going to adjust itself to? The majority, which are whites. Hispanics comes next. You wonder all this information about what Trump's going on. Years ago, if you studied your history, you would know. During the 17 and 1800s, there were two schools of thoughts. Number one of them was the expansionists who believed that America needed to expand its boundaries. And then, of course, there was the isolationists who believed that America should stay where they are. We got natural borders such as Canada up top, we got South America at the bottom, and we got the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. Trump is an isolationist. This is not new what you're seeing, but you think it's new because you haven't studied your history. When you study your history, you now can identify what these people are doing. It's not new. I use an example of this. If you get a car, you don't say old car anymore. You say pre-owned. You don't say graveyard, and I'm going to the graveyard. You now say cemetery. You also say mortuary. It's the same thing but dressed up. You preachers that know your Bible, you should understand that many of the old preachers used to preach a sermon about Lot and about Abraham, his uncle. One of the sermons that was preached is that God had said, should I reveal to Abraham what I'm about to do over there in Sodom and Gomorrah? So God decided that he would. And he told him, I'm going to destroy him. But the scripture says Abraham was vexed by the conversation of the wicked. Now, many preachers have preached, yeah, Lot was vexed by the conversation of the wicked. They didn't like the way he didn't like the way they talked, so therefore it got his nerves going. Wrong. Conversation at that time meant way of life, not conversation as we use today. It's a matter of understanding. Study it. Look at it for what it is. Today, our young people, well, during my era when I was young anyway, we used to say, man, that's bad. That's cool. Well, bad meant bad and cool meant cool. But when we said it, it meant that it was okay. We took the difference of the wordage and we used it for our own benefits. And that's what our blacks must do today, is to understand the language, not only for now, but what it has meant in the past. Most of you are not even aware that the census, Trump is trying to negate the census. What he's saying is that they are illegal aliens on the census. and so they shouldn't be counted. Well, what does that have to do with anything? What it has to do with, if you know your history, you would understand that your congressman, who we value, supposed to, makes a decision, and the government makes a decision on how much money is supposed to go to each state. And it's based on population. And it's based on the census. So if you remove the population from the census, you now have a problem with your state representatives. If you don't have what they require, they remove a representative. And if they remove a representative and the numbers are not there, you don't get the money for the federal programs that you need. That's why he's doing that. Why is he so hard on immigration? He's hard because he understands something that we haven't even looked into. And that is, by the year 2046, the minorities will now become the majority. And who are they? Hispanics and blacks. Who would the Hispanics vote for? They vote for the individuals that say that they can come into the country, which are the Democratic Party. We have to look at our history. This is nothing new. They've been doing it. But if you don't know your history, oh, that's white history. Yes, it is. But it tells you something about what you're dealing with. You must know white history. You must know black history. You must know world history. And I make it my business to study all of it, so that if I'm asked a question, I can tell you why. If I'm asked a question, I can tell you what's going on in Italy. Pythagorean and his theory, and where he got that information from, and Plato, and Socrates, and Dionysus. They got it from Egypt, from the Wharf School. What was the Wharf School? It was a school that, in order for you to graduate, you have to be there 40 years. Plato went, Socrates went, Dionysus went, and the longest that they stayed was with Plato for 6 years.
Amen. That's a very, very good message you brought us today. You brought us up to, what's the last year you cut off at? Was that 1965?
1965.
All right, so we value this information, and we will definitely want you to come back and pick it up from that, and give our listeners some. I know they were shocked tonight to hear this kind of message, and we definitely want you to come back. And is there anything else that you want to say, Pastor Godbout?
No, there's nothing I want to say. I think it was great information that we go back and learn our history. I want to say this year, we should not wait till just February, Black History Month, to learn about history.
Amen.
Our history should be taught year-round, and to our young people, to educate our young people about our inheritance. And I think it's very important that our young people, even as me, as I even need to know more about our inheritance. I know Black history when I came up in 1972 was the first time I heard of Black history in Trenton High School, and it only lasted 1 year. And so they took it out of the school. Even in the state of New Jersey, they had on the board for the education that should we learn about Black history or should we learn more about this year, about this
Gender Pacific.
Gender persistence. So what did they choose? Did they choose Black history or did they choose gender persistence? They choose gender persistence because they still don't want us to know our history.
Our history, yes, sir.
They do not want us to know our history, and we do have a lot of history. I mean, all the way, this America was built on black men. A lot of black men, black women have helped build this here country. And you was talking about how we have invented a lot of things, but never have got credit for nothing that we have been in. So our people need to learn and understand our history. There's nothing new underneath the sun. That was basically what you was telling us. And so what we was going through today has already been going on.
Right.
We're just in a different time, a different dispensation of time of where things are going on. So, Brother Shulman, I appreciate your knowledge. When we're looking forward for you to come back to share some more with us. And I know maybe some people may not gravitate all that because it's just hard to eat steak and potatoes at the same time.
At the same time.
You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Then you're trying to digest it with a Coke soda. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Well, you know,
So-
that's something they have to get used to because it's been taken away from them. So now we're reintroducing them to them. You know, we have to spoon feed them now. I just want to thank my newfound family out in Texas. My fiance, Denise Petrie, her son Adrian, his wife Karen, Chloe, and Chase. You know, I hope you guys are listening, and we'll be back on the air, if God willing, next week.
Did you have any questions? Did anybody ask any
Did
questions?
any of you guys have any questions for our speaker?
We have one question that he can maybe address
Clarify.
something that's clarified
Yeah.
that you may not understood. Amen. And we don't want nobody to go away.
And also, listeners, our telephone number is 609-807-2492. I forgot to give it out in the beginning of the show. With so much information coming out the speaker's mouth here, and we were just anxious to get
Jump
it.
right into it.
They
didn't
jump
we?
right into it, yes, sir. And with that, Pastor Gabo, won't you just pray us out and pray for the wisdom and understanding that was brought forth today, and that our listeners will get a chance to digest it, and maybe next time we have him on, which I believe is the 20th. I mean, next week, next Sunday.
Amen.
And we'll be able to have those questions ready and get people to really think about it and go dust them old history books off and ask some questions. All right. Brother Sheldon, what do you want to do in closing?
The only thing I would like to say is that history has a lot of information. You can get information off of the internet. You can read books. I preferably would like you to read books because there's old information. And whenever you get information, these are the things you must look out for. Keep in mind that the writers and the speakers of information are looking to have something that's pro for whatever options there may be, or con, against it. And then there are those who don't care about pro or con. So what you have to do is combine all the information that you get and then make your decision. And if you do that, you will come out with a better understanding about your history, whether it's American history, European history, world history, black history, or whatever the case.
All right. Thank you. So if the Lord be willing, we'll be back here live on Facebook, Man in the House Radio Show at HamiltonRadio.net, channel HR2. Good evening.
Amen. God
Amen.
bless you.
God bless.
Praise God.
Excellent job, my brother. Excellent job. It's a lot. You just,
I don't know why my phone kept coming on like that, man.
yeah, it's a-